Hi, my name is Christian Devon and welcome to RetroView, a safe zone for physical media. On this edition, we're going to be looking back or through at one of my favorite director's least favorite films. Yes, as you can clearly see, I'm talking about John Carpenter's Memoirs of an Invisible Man.
In a movie like you've never seen before.
We're the only people that can give you your life back.
I can see through my eyelids, I can see through the top of my head.
Chevy Chase. Daryl Hannah, Memoirs of an Invisible Man, rated PG-13.
And in the interest of transparency, hey, wait a minute. I want my molecules back. Okay, that's better. Now that I can see you and you can see me, it's good to be seen. And I wanted to talk about one of John Carpenter's arguably most critically, I wouldn't say not reviled, but more like a critical confusion and disappointment in the release. And out of all the John Carpenter films that I could be talking about, I'm choosing this one. Because John Carpenter is in my pantheon of favorite directors. I actually saw Dark Star on its opening night when I was a kid on an amazing double feature with Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, which was very transformative until a couple years later when this other film called Star Wars came out. They kind of combined both those films in an interesting way. And Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Dark Star and Alien, of course, actually worked on Star Wars, which is amazing. And so Carpenter's a big influence in my writing because I always like his screenplays, particularly Assault on Precinct 13. And I was going to do a retro review on The Thing. It was just added to the National Registry of Film last week, which is pretty amazing for a film that had such a terrible box office and critical reception when it came out. But almost every John Carpenter film gets a reevaluation, for better or for worse. And there's always something interesting in all of them, and particularly in the film that we're going to be talking about on this retro review. I was also going to do another John Carpenter retro review on the 50th anniversary of my favorite John Carpenter film, and I'm waiting for a 4K, which I hope comes out this year. So that definitely, we're going to do a couple John Carpenter retro reviews coming up. Every one of his films is, fascinating and worthy of a discussion and a look back upon. Now, since every John Carpenter film gets a critical reevaluation, of course, I feel like in the past few years there's been one over Memoirs of an Invisible Man, and for good reason. It's originally was based on a 1987 novel by H.F. Stein about a stockbroker who becomes invisible. I've never read it. I consider it part of the genre of those late 80s books like Less Than Zero and Bright Lights, Big City, etc., kind of like yuppie trauma, and I associate that with this. I do want to read it now. I'm actually more fascinated since I've been kind of getting back into reevaluating, looking back at Memoirs of an Invisible Man. I thought I should look back to the source, and everybody says, of course, the book is better, which makes sense, and I'm sure it's more interior than the film is. Chevy Chase wanted to make this movie, and he'd had the rights to it, and he really wanted to break out from his comedy roles into a little more serious acting. And he'd been serious, or he'd played the romantic lead in a few other films, Foul Play and Seems Like Old Times, and people kind of forget that he was in the William Friedkin so-called comedy deal of the century from 1983 with Sigourney Weaver. And that's a very interesting film. And in the documentary about William Friedkin, they talk about all of his movies except for Deal of the Century, which was a pretty big bomb. And I remember watching it a few times on HBO as a kid. And the film's peak idea of like William Friedkin humor is Gregory Hines getting shot in the foot with blood pumping out of his foot as Sigourney Weaver and Chevy Chase have this conversation while he's writhing in pain and squirting blood. I'm thinking that is exactly what William Friedkin would find funny. And the trailer looks like it's directed by, John Landis. But an interesting film, but not one that is discussed a lot. And I would love to hear about how Friedkin worked with Chevy Chase. That sounds like two volatile people working together, but maybe it was fine. And originally, Ivan Reitman was pegged to direct it, but he wanted to go in the much more kind of obvious comedic route, which Chase did not want to do, so he left the project. And Richard Donner was briefly attached. He left the project. They brought in the screenwriter Bill Goldman, famous screenwriter of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the novel and screenplay film of The Princess Bride, etc. I actually once had a great phone conversation with Mr. Goldman, or Bill as he told me to call him. That's another story. And he talks about it in one of his books, Which Lie Did I Tell, about how Chase wanted to make a movie about, the loneliness and invisibility, and Bill Goldman just couldn't wrap his head around Chevy Chase wanting to play it serious, which is not really fair to Chevy Chase, and clearly he wanted to branch out, as Bill Murray eventually did and other comedians did, so it wasn't out of the ballpark for him to want this, and I do give Chevy Chase, some props for trying this. They did bring in another screenwriter to work on the script, and eventually I had read that Kurt Russell recommended John Carpenter Chevy Chase. And ironically, Kurt Russell made Now You See Him, Now You Don't.
Make a date to see Kurt Russell, Cesar Romero, and Joe Flynn make disappearing hilarious. In Walt Disney Productions, Now You See Him, Now You Don't.
Which was a 1972 Disney film starring Kurt Russell as the character Dexter Riley, who appeared in 3 films, the Dexter Riley trilogy, which I'll probably talk about on some future retro view. And he discovers an invisibility formula, and I love Now You See Him, Now You Don't. It's a very charming film, and there's even a reference to it in Big Trouble in Little China.
Not like he says.
Yeah, it did, Uncle Chew, 2 hours ago. Tall guy, weird clothes. First you see him, then you don't.
And it's fascinating that Carpenter's favorite actor is Kurt Russell, and then later on Carpenter would direct Memoirs of an Invisible Man. So there you go. And Chevy Chase thought it was a good idea because he was the one that actually hired John Carpenter.
But the biggest surprise will be Chevy Chase. He will be extraordinary in this movie.
I've never worked with a director as good as he is for knowing everything about camera, everything about how I should behave as a character. He knows everything about every lens.
So it was kind of Carpenter's chance to be a hired hand at the studio, kind of what he had done for Starman, but on that film he'd actually, helped get Jeff Bridges a Best Actor nomination. I believe the only Oscar-nominated anything in any Carpenter film. So that's pretty fascinating. And because it was kind of an adventure thriller, in Hitchcock mold, it made sense for Carpenter to come on board, because if anybody's got Hitchcockian style, it's John Carpenter. And Carpenter was very much on board with the idea of Chevy Chase breaking out as a different character, and then also trying to work within the other elements of the script. The studio apparently wanted it more comedy, and Chevy Chase wanted it more serious, and John Carpenter was caught in the middle. So unfortunately it turned out to be a very terrible experience for John Carpenter. He said his worst experience making a movie ever.
So you're directing, and he's like got this attitude.
Oh yeah, it was bad.
Was it one of those things where they had to shut things down?
No, it never got that way. I took it all in. I just internalized it. But that was my worst. Worst.
So there was a lot of background drama, and there's a pretty amazing 30-minute documentary that aired on HBO to promote Memoirs of an Invisible Man, hosted by Chevy Chase with a guest appearance by Mel Gibson for some reason. And Chase narrates it in the kind of insincere, smart-ass style that he was known for, which kind of cuts against what the film is trying to do. But you can see that. You can watch, there are moments in there where you can definitely see the tension that was inherent on that set.
Boy, that thing comes down, you're kissing nothing.
Thank God.
You little bitch. She's been this way the whole picture.
Oh, hi, how are you?
Chevy Chase trying to lecture legendary cinematographer William Fraker about lighting is a pretty amazing moment.
Okay, all right, go back. Yeah, I'm figuring out the vectors and the angle of the lens and all of those things. I know those things. Been in the movie business.
What's a vector?
A vector is a place at which focal points intersect.
And you can see Chevy Chase get very frustrated with the special effects team needing him there. And Carpenter makes some, subtle comments about Chevy needing to leave. And you can see the actors kind of ignoring Carpenter when he's trying to engage with them. So there's definitely, you can sense the tension on the set just from watching that. And, that plays into the film's, weaknesses, unfortunately. Now, I saw Memoirs of an Invisible Man opening day, and I pretty much have a record of seeing almost every John Carpenter movie on opening day, opening weekend. And it's because it's always, to me, like I said, he's one of my favorite directors, so it's always a treat, and it's always an experience, and I'm always hopeful that I'm going to get something, really unique. So what I was struck by in Memoirs of an Invisible Man is it has an amazing soundtrack by Shirley Walker. It's actually one of the first soundtracks credited to a woman, if you can believe it or not. And it's Carpenter, of course, didn't do the music for it, and I'm glad, actually. I'm sure it would have been a cool Carpenter theme. There's no doubt he could have come with a theme, but this has got a very stirring adventure thriller music, and I love it. It's one of my favorite themes of all time in any movie. The whole score is beautiful, and it really does help the movie a lot. You know, a good score can help. Can't save a bad movie, but it can certainly help. And I don't think Memoirs of an Invisible Man is a bad movie by any stretch. It's just confused and tonally, and I felt that watching it opening day. And I was rooting for Chevy Chase to do it, to pull it off. And I think in a lot of scenes he does. This is certainly his best film performance. Despite all the background noise, Carpenter did get a great performance out of him as far as he could give one and as far as the script allows him to. And there's scenes where maybe he's not so strong, because the thing about Chase is he's got a kind of insincerity, and so that's the hardest thing to get over. His whole gag in a way is being insincere. And in this film he's got to come across as sincere, and there's a lot of scenes where he does.
My purse! My purse!
You sense there's a rage in Chevy Chase anyway, so the scenes where he's angry, he's really angry. And there's I think the best scenes in the film are between him and Sam Neill. And Sam Neill is the MVP of the film, actually, and Carpenter loved him, and of course they went on to work on Carpenter is pretty cool in The Mouth of Madness. And so those scenes together, Sam Neill and Chevy Chase, actually work really well. And there's a scene where Chase, grabs Sam Neill from behind, and it's really good.
I don't sleep well. I can see through my eyelids, I can see through the top of my head, I get wall-eyed, I get batshit!
Just the film doesn't quite know what kind of, it is. And if you watch the trailers, the early trailers kind of sold it as this kind of wacky comedy a bit, with Chase, bumping into things with his hat on, and of course the famous line from the film,
I want my molecules back!
Which in the trailer is kind of silly and etc., but in the film, it's part of a longer dialogue scene and doesn't play out that way. And there's nothing wrong with the line, it's a good line, it just depends on the tone you're going for in the film. And I think the biggest example of the kind of the tonal imbalance of the film is the scene where Chase knocks out this businessman hailing a cab. The cab driver is played by Donald Lee from Big Trouble in Little China, also, by the way. And Chase carries his body in and pretends he's drunk. And Carpenter knows how to direct comedy, because Dark Star's a comedy and Big Trouble in Little China is certainly a comedy, etc. And there's a lot of comedic elements in his films. But this scene just plays kind of odd, like it's like serious, but it should be funny, but it's not funny. And there's just something off about the tone of that scene, And so a lot of scenes kind of carry that. And there's an entire section in this beach house where Chase goes out to hide. And it's maybe some of the worst stuff that Carpenter's ever directed. He has no feel for this kind of social satire. I'm not even sure what the scene, what these characters, played by Michael McKean as his friend, in a very thankless role, and this suitor who's after Daryl Hannah, and just none of it works really well. And it's not a comedy by any stretch, and Siskel and Ebert panned it because they thought it wasn't funny enough, but it really isn't a comedy when you start watching it.
And you could have a lot of fun by really getting nitpicky about stuff like
even
that.
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids did a better job of following the consequences of its characters in an improbable situation.
It has comedic elements and could play out that way, but it is going for an adventure thriller, which probably works against the idea of what Chase wanted, which is the invisibility or the loneliness of invisibility. But the film doesn't really go into this notion of what it means to be invisible, and it just becomes a kind of rote action thriller towards the end, which is fine, but the romance is, not believable necessarily, and it just ends on a really strange note too. The ending I thought was so weird, because I read somebody say it's like the studio really just wants the audience to know they can leave pretty soon, because the credits kind of start right at the end. It doesn't really have a nice finale the way it should. I mean, the music's fantastic, but it's just not a very satisfying conclusion. Now, the positives, along with the special effects, are that people say it's kind of an impersonal John Carpenter film. You can't see his style on it, but his style is all over it. He even plays a helicopter pilot in a cameo. And so, and it's William Fraker, like I said, shot the film, one of my favorite cinematographers who did Bullet, and also 1941 Spielberg's and many other films. And I love his style. And Carpenter's got a great, you know, once again, kind of Hitchcockian style to the film, particularly when you see him in the driving scenes. It's very Carpenter-esque, kind of a widescreen look where you'll see a bit of a rear projected background that looks kind of surreal, so it looks cool. And then when Chase is hanging out on this banister railing and there's a stairway behind him, very Hitchcockian shot. It's set in San Francisco, which is, you know, of course, Vertigo City, etc. So it does have a lot of Carpenter elements to it, certainly widescreen and action, you know, wise. And, you know, one of the interesting things and, you know, the good things of Memoirs of an Invisible Man are the special effects by ILM. It's kind of the, you know, bridge between old school effects and the coming digital age, because there is some, you know, CG usage in it, and some of it holds up and some of it doesn't necessarily. But it's always fun to see however you do the, you know, the effects. And I can see why Chase would probably be upset about some of the stuff, because when you see the background, you know, documentaries, Chase has to go through a lot. He's got to get these, you know, scleric, whatever they call them, lenses in his eyes, and a lot of it looks really painful. And so, you know, you can see Daryl Hannah and Chevy Chase definitely do not get along, and even after she kisses him in the scene, she backs off. In the movie, it's actually a really lovely scene and one of Carpenter's most lyrical moments.
What's happening to me?
Don't. It's beautiful.
The film also has some really nice nods to the original Invisible Man, and actually a few scenes where he's in this, you know, outfit very similar to the Claude Rains one. He looks very cool, and I wish they would have kind of carried that look, kind of that dark man look through the film. It would have, you know, played out a little differently. And as I said, the score is wonderful, and there's something about the film that kind of sticks with you, or sticks with me anyway, and so I watch it, you know, it's a film that I will rewatch. Now, since this is ostensibly a channel about physical media, I should say right now that I do not own Memoirs of an Invisible Man. It's been I've watched it streaming, and like I've always argued, there's some films you may not want to own because you may never want to watch them again, and that's okay. And if it's a good print and you can watch it streaming, nothing wrong with that, which I do all the time, of course. And I've never felt the need to own Memoirs of an Invisible Man, although I've watched it a few times, and recently it's been free on YouTube, which you can check out right now, and a very, very good mastered version of it. And I said if they release a 4K with the extensive extras and commentary, hello, whoever's out there, I would love to, you know, work on something like that. I would certainly pick that up. And the film does look great, and I think now there's a lot of people, you can, you know, search around the internets and see people talking about this film, and I think we all have the same kind of point of view about it, that it tonally doesn't mesh together. But Chase is certainly, you know, good in the film, and even if he's miscast, he does work in a lot of scenes, and if they would have settled on a tone, they could have had something, you know, much more unique and memorable and, you know, maybe successful. But I'm glad that people are seeing past or through the flaws of Memoirs of an Invisible Man, and it's one of the kind of films I always like, which is kind of the flawed, fascinating failure. And it's by no means a bad film. You can't watch and go, oh, this is just terrible. It's just not. It just got scenes that don't work, the tone doesn't work, the leads are probably miscast, and et cetera, et cetera. But that also makes for a very fascinating viewing experience and discussion afterwards, like every John Carpenter film. So thank you for retro viewing, and I'll see you soon before you unsee me.
I want my molecules back!